You are listening to Off the Shelf, a podcast by The Conference Board.
Well, welcome to another in our series of the Off the Shelf podcasts. I'm Rebecca Ray, and I have the privilege of leading the human capital function here at the Conference Board. You know, I'm very excited given that this month of May is Military Appreciation Month, and there are so many things that we need to be thankful to our veterans and those who are currently serving and their families, and we owe them a tremendous debt of gratitude. We also need to think about how we welcome military personnel back into society here in the United States, and how we might ease the way that they can find new ways to contribute to the businesses that they join. And so it's very important for us to maybe talk a little bit about that. And I could not have two greater people to come and talk about that. The first is Dr. Kristin Sabo. She's an industrial organizational psychologist, and she has extensive experience as an applied research scientist and strategist. She's an HR leader and a public speaker on the topic of not only military veterans, but also military spouse employment and human performance optimization. She's currently with the Boeing company, and she's an adjunct professor at Georgetown University. She herself is a former Army officer and a research psychologist. Prior to joining the Army, she was involved in several roles in different think tank organizations and being an academic university researcher and lecturer. She holds both a master's and a PhD in industrial organizational psychology from the University of South Florida. Kristen, I'm absolutely thrilled to have you with us today.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction.
Kristen, I'm absolutely thrilled that you're with us, and also that we're joined by Dr. Nathan Ainspan, who is your co-author, as you know, on the recent book of Military Veteran Employment, Your Competitive Advantage, a Business Guide for the Data-Driven Leader. And so he's a terrific expert and thought leader in this area. He's currently the senior research psychologist with the Military Civilian Transition Office at the Department of Defense. Nathan's research focuses on improving civilian employment opportunities for returning service members and the psychosocial benefits that employment for wounded warriors and injured veterans can deliver. He's the author of several different related books as well, and he received his PhD in industrial organizational psychology from Cornell. Nathan, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here, and it's even a form of a homecoming for me. When I received my PhD, the first job I had after getting it was working at the Conference Board, doing research for it. So it's particularly thrilling to be back here.
Well, it's very kind of you to say. And as a former Army brat, I'm particularly excited to talk about how we can improve the ways in which we find great new places for our returning veterans. And so just thrilled to have you both. So let's jump right into it. So I've mentioned the book that the two of you have just co-authored, and I wondered if you could share with us sort of the current state of veteran employment and why this is such an important issue.
Thank you. It is a big issue for the country. Up to about 5 years ago, veteran unemployment was a bigger concern. Veteran unemployment compared to civilian was about 3 to 4 times as high as civilian unemployment. We were seeing a lot of suicides, a lot of difficulty for veterans leaving the military and getting back into the job. Through a lot of good work led by a lot of companies and the DoD office that I'm also involved with, the unemployment rate has gone down. Prior to the pandemic, it really never exceeded 4% unemployment a month, and that is ridiculously low compared to where it was before. Since the pandemic, it has gone up as it could be imagined, but surprisingly, it never again exceeded the civilian rate. So unemployment, which was the big driver for a lot of the efforts in this area that a lot of companies undertook, has improved. What we're really focusing now is underemployment. And the fact that veterans and companies are frequently two ships in the night that are passing each other. The veterans really don't know what they can do in the civilian world, what they can contribute, and companies frequently don't know how to get access and how to bring them in and how to retain them. And as we'll talk about, veterans get many skills while they're in the military, have great experiences and training. Companies are highly desiring of these and would like to get them in. But again, they're just passing each other and unable to really make that connection. So really now it's understanding the benefits and what veterans can bring to your company, understanding your unique company needs and what you'd want to do with the veteran population, and then executing that to bring them in, and then focus on retaining them to maximize the value that they can bring to the company.
And just to add on to what Nate said about veterans employment in particular, we also want to acknowledge the importance of the military family. So thank you for your service as a military brat. You were born into that and actually didn't get the choice to serve, versus your parent that served made that choice. And so I think that is something that we need to acknowledge. When we look at military family employment, this is actually also an equally important point of discussion. We find that military spouses are 92% female and experience unemployment at 5 times the rate of the national average. This was pre-pandemic. It has actually, they have fared worse during the pandemic, in part because of this large female majority, and also due to the nature of the jobs that they hold. For military spouses, actually over 50% pre-pandemic reported that they were underemployed. And so I think this is something also that we want to highlight. Though our book focuses on veterans, we do have some mention of military spouses and just the importance of ensuring that whole family unit is gainfully employed and finding purpose through their work.
Kristen, I think that's such an important point, because there is the broader picture and then there is the very large component that is the military family, particularly spouses. And, kind of crack the code on all the various pieces of this is so important. And in the book that the two of you have edited, you have a variety of views and a variety of experts who are looking at this from angles of, employers, returning military, a variety of perspectives. And I wondered if you could give us a sense of the topics and the range of viewpoints that are reflected in the book.
We have almost 30 different contributors who are authors in the different chapters of the book, and we've tried to ensure that the chapters can cover every part of the hiring process, from seeking out resumes to finding the population, and then going through actually interviewing, hiring, and retaining them, with an emphasis on retaining the employees. Plus, we also bring in military spouses, reservists, and guardsmen, and what happens when they come back from being called up or deployed. And among the 30 people, we're very proud of the range of backgrounds we have. Virtually all of them have some connection to the data and the research, which is what we emphasize throughout our book. We have many industrial organizational psychologists, and we also have practitioners, including from companies like Walmart. We have consultants who advise companies, and we brought together a range of perspectives, because this can't be addressed by just one person, by one practitioner sharing their background. We want to bring in people who are understanding of the science and can cite from the science and the research to be able to help companies improve what they're doing.
So let's talk a little bit more about how that approach makes this book different. It makes this conversation different, because you are looking at this from such a sort of a well-considered, well-rounded view. Is that what sets this book apart?
Yeah, I think that is one of the pivotal ways in which this book is different from others that are out there. We certainly acknowledge there are many fantastic resources that have been put out there, particularly in the last few years, on this topic of veteran employment. One thing that we felt like was missing in the marketplace, though, was a data and research forward approach. That means that leaders and HR practitioners and others that are experts in this space, or others that want to learn more about this space, can actually look to solution sets that are based in science. And not just based in science, but also really best practices that are tried and true over the course of time. So one thing I think that's interesting in the book is, across the book, for instance, we have a chapter on mentoring. This is a solution set not just for ensuring you have better retention and a heightened employee experience for your veterans and military family members at your company. It's also a solution for any diverse group of employees, right? And so I think even looking beyond the topic of veterans, the topics we focus on and the best practices that are based in research highlighted throughout the book are a more efficient means to reach success from a talent management perspective. And they also are actually really effective ways of engaging all talent holistically, though we do obviously focus on veterans. And there are some very key, unique differences about that subpopulation that I think are important to acknowledge.
And I would echo, and in the terms of the military, foot stomp what Kristen just said in terms of veterans guiding us and helping us to understand other populations that can be useful for companies. We've seen in the diversity and inclusion D&I initiatives, including some work from the conference board, that veterans can really help us. If we can get what we're doing right with veterans, it will work with other populations as well. So if you focus on understanding veteran culture and integrating them into your organization, you'll probably be doing well by other cultures as well.
You know, Nathan, Kristen spoke a moment ago about some of the success that people can find following some of the guidelines that are offered in the book. I wondered if one of you, or perhaps both of you, could share like a very tangible success story from the book about how people perhaps approached looking for military veterans and employing them successfully, what innovative kinds of things they considered and then executed.
So I think when we talk about innovation in the space of veterans employment, we really have to talk about making sure you're meeting the value proposition of the veteran themselves. And that, of course, means also understanding where they're at in their employment and career trajectory, whether they're recently transitioned or perhaps they've been, in the civilian workforce for 20 plus years. Just like any employee, understanding that value proposition is going to be quite critical. I think some of the more innovative work, quite honestly, right now, going back to the conversation at the beginning of the importance of military families, is in how we're supporting military spouses to have continued careers despite moving every 2 to 4 years potentially to be a trailing spouse to a military member. And also caregivers is another area that you're starting to see more innovation around, and understanding that it's not just about the veteran, there's other people in that environment and ecosystem. I think another success story that I've seen increasingly occurring is with our Guard and reservists. So these are veterans that are still currently serving in the National Guard or Reserve, and they're called up potentially 1 weekend a year, but they can also, or 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year. There's other versions of serving in the reserves and Guard, but they also deploy, much like our active duty. And that can be a very jarring experience to one day be in the office in a suit and tie, the next day to be deploying to, an austere combat environment. And then when you come back, expect to walk right back into that office in a suit and tie again, or, other formal wear, whatever you wear to the office, without acknowledgement of that experience. Versus on the active duty, you have more support because people around you have been through it with you. And so what we're seeing in the Guard and Reserve space is an increase in organizations supporting our Guard and Reservists in terms of the compensation and benefits. So matching their pay for periods of time while they're away. So they're actually in some ways getting double pay, or making sure they're getting a pay differential. Oftentimes the military pay may not be what the market is paying in the civilian market. So companies will pay that difference. And also support mechanisms when they return, say, from a prolonged time away, such as a deployment, such as coaching or mentoring, to help that person transition back in, because they effectively are going through the veteran to civilian employment transition process repeatedly, which is quite taxing to do once, let alone multiple times.
And one idea that we've heard and that gets addressed in the book is companies have realized that marketing and trying to recruit the veterans doesn't just begin with the career fair. For a telecom provider that has a help desk, they've had it established that if the person who calls in is having trouble with a bill or any issues because they have a family member who's deploying, they get transferred to a specialist office that knows how to work with military families. And if there's a concern from the spouse of someone who's been deployed or who might be being called up, they're been told to be very flexible with payment plans because of what the military family is going through. And they do this, one, to show that they are very supportive of the military families by pretty much putting their money where their mouth is, by willing to not charge interest rates, to be flexible, to be understanding, to know the terminology. So if they say, he's PCSing, the person on the other end of the phone will understand that that means, there'll be permanent change of station. And two, on a selfish level, they realize that this is a good way to recruit the members later in a few years, because if a member a few years from now, as their military career is ending, either they or their spouse will remind them how well this company treated them while they were still in the military, and they find that that kind of marketing is priceless, and that will be one of the first companies the member will think of, because they know, they're not just marketing themselves as friendly to the military, they really are helping out military families. And they found that that's a great way to recruit the people even before they start getting alternate and competing offers to come visit their companies.
Nathan, you talk in the book a lot about this military-civilian divide, and some of it is just understanding the language that each is using and understanding what it means in context. Can you talk more about that and how that impacts veteran employment and what can companies do about it?
Sure. The divide goes deeper because we're finding that about 8% of Americans have any connection with the military, especially with the all-volunteer force now that we no longer have the draft. That military service tends to run in families, with Kristen being an example that she is a military brat, married to a military member, and has served in the military herself. And we could probably go back to even more connections if we had the time. But that means that the people who are in the military become kind of a self-propagating family because they also tend to marry military people or people who have some connection to the military, which means that the rest of the nation really has no touch with the military and doesn't know what it's like to serve, what the terminology is, or even will really see military families in their day-to-day activities. Many of the military families will live on the base, and one group ran an analysis of population densities of military groups and civilians, and there was very little overlap geographically and physically between them. They're also living on what they call the greatest gated communities in our nation, and we aren't really interacting much and knowing more about it. In the past, when there was the draft and more people could point to military service to understand it, more families and friends, children would know what was going on, but we're not seeing that. So we really are seeing two different cultures that don't overlap frequently until that military person leaves the military and is looking for a job in the civilian world. And now it's almost as if they came from a different country, a different culture, and they're trying to fit into this brave new world. We've had people who have served in the military come back and say they felt more comfortable in Iraq or Afghanistan than they do trying to get a civilian job because it just feels like it's that different a world. And you could imagine, and this is where industrial psychologists are good at understanding cultural clashes and cultural differences, that welcoming this veteran into your company could be like welcoming someone from a different country or a part of the nation that has completely different cultural practices, and that can result in miscommunications and difficulties, in frustrations. And given that the veteran is a minority population, they're going to feel like the odd person out and ill at ease sometimes, and that may lead to a departure from the company. Even if it's a good fit on every other variable, the fact that the culture clash makes them feel uncomfortable and they don't really sink into the company could generate the difficulty, turnover, lack of productivity. So if companies can understand this cultural difference and address it and bridge it and bring the members in so that they feel comfortable and the civilians can comfortably exist with them, there'll be a benefit for the company and its bottom line.
Nathan, thank you. I'd be curious to know what you or Kristen think about some of these misconceptions that civilian employers might have about hiring veterans. And I wondered if you could touch on that a little bit. I certainly resonate with feeling more comfortable in one culture. As an Army brat, I moved just about every year of my life and was kind of dropped into these gated communities in different parts of the world, as you put it. And it is very different, that reentry into a more civilian community. So can you tell me about some of the misconceptions that might be holding some employers back?
Sure. The one that we keep hearing a lot is they see the military as people running around with guns and fighting and knocking things down and breaking things, and don't see how someone like that could have a civilian job. DoD ran an analysis using the ONET occupational converter tool and found that 80% of the military occupations have a direct civilian connection. So there are teams of people in the military in uniform who are doing IT work, who are doctors and physicians and dentists, and who are doing project management using the tools that any civilian organization would recognize. So it's understanding that you're not just looking at infantry people when you're looking at military jobs. And even among the infantry, especially among them, but amongst all the other jobs, the military is coming in with enormous amount of training and skills, particularly soft skills, the non-technical skills like leadership, the ability to think under stressful situations, the ability to manage budgets, to work with a diverse organization. They've had international experience. the military is not just a bunch of people running around with weapons. It's really a high-tech organization.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to know sometimes the military holds its own biases against itself too. There's been some interesting research by Edelman research about the veterans' perception of themselves and also the employer's perception of them. And sometimes veterans hold stereotypes of themselves that can hold themselves back as they go into the civilian workforce. So when I'm speaking to groups of veterans, I do talk about the ways in which we have to think of ourselves as individuals as we make that transition. In the military, culturally, it's a collective organization that requires you to work in teams to accomplish the mission. And that's you live or die, hopefully not literally, by that team, right? And so you enter the civilian world and suddenly that identity has to shift towards inwardly focused and it feels very selfish. And so when they enter the civilian sector, some of the misconceptions about how veterans work are simply due to what success looks like in different environments, going back to that civilian military divide. What success looks like in the military in terms of behaviors that make you successful are different oftentimes than those behaviors that make someone successful in the civilian world. But interestingly, we find by research that veterans tend to score higher on tests of mental agility than civilian counterparts. They actually tend to stay in CEO level jobs longer than non-veteran counterparts at the CE level. Previously, there was an understanding based upon some data that veterans may leave their first job at higher rates, disproportionate compared to civilian counterparts. We've seen more recently, actually, though, that veterans are staying in their jobs longer, particularly initially, but that highlights the importance of focusing on retention and not just hiring someone to be your token veteran, just similar to other, D&I efforts where we're targeting different populations for the diversity that they bring us. We have to think of veterans similarly and understand that, there's more individual differences within a group than there are between groups. And always just keep that in mind, that at the end of the day, it's simply another person that made a decision to serve their country and now they're seeking employment.
Absolutely. Well, let me ask Kristen, if I could ask you and then ask Nathan to weigh in as well. If a company's looking to hire and retain veterans, what are the top 4 or 5 things that you recommend that they do to make sure that they're successful in their efforts?
Sure, that's a great question. I think something that needs to be discussed from an actionable perspective. So 1, they can engage relevant military installations as they're seeking to build those relationships and their transition offices. And when I say relevant, what I mean is installations with the skill set you are looking to hire. Don't just assume that the installation that's nearest to you actually also has the skill set you're looking to hire. Many military installations have specific missions and they specialize in specific types of things. So if you go to an installation that focuses on something that you're not hiring for, then you're not going to find a lot of success or fit in those candidates. But if you can go to the installations that actually focus on the skill sets that you're looking for, you'll have great success in terms of building out that relationship, both for the short term and the long term. 2 more I'll mention, and then I'll kick it over to Nate, is something that we've highlighted a few times, is your goal is not to just hire, your goal is to retain. And this goes across the board for employees, but especially with our veterans who are in many ways culturally inherently very committed and loyal to the groups that they find identity or self-identify with. And so when you're focused on retaining, you really need to make sure that you have the programs, the policies, and the support networks inside your company ready and prepared to welcome that population in so that their onboarding experience is positive and they stay with you because they build that loyalty quickly with your company. And then a third one is that you need to commit in word and also deed in a very robust sense. And that means you need to have a bit of a strategic mindset to how you're handling veterans employment if you're truly serious about attending to the population. And what we see a lot of times is companies will do great efforts in terms of their public relations and communications and want to talk about all the great they're doing. But when you actually go inside the company and start looking at, boots on the ground, so to speak, what are you doing to help people be better and progress in their careers and move up the ladder and achieve all their dreams? Oftentimes, there's not a lot to be said. And so companies really need to focus on the quality of what they're doing with this population because veterans will see past it. They're designed to be truth seekers, right? And find value and be values driven in their approaches. And so when they discover a company that they had great hopes for because of their advertising maybe isn't walking the walk, that affects their understanding of the brand. And it is a tight-knit community in the military, and people talk. So it is contingent on your brand, honestly, to also walk the walk.
Terrific. Nate, what would you add?
Sure. When I started at the conference board, one thing the editorial department taught me early on and frequently is when you write up reports and recommendations for the business leaders, don't use the word should. There's nuance in companies, and what works for one company may not work for another, and there aren't really the hard and fast checklists that you can administer. And that idea stayed with me subsequently and really permeates throughout our book. It's hard to really say, like, here's the things you must do and have to do. Every company will be different. Every company's mileage will vary. So that comes down to one of the big recommendations that we make is you need to understand your company's background, culture, your needs, and why you're recruiting veterans. Not just because you think it's the right thing to do, not just because this is an underdrawn upon and underutilized population, where if you can access and retain this population, you'll have the competitive advantage. But really think about what is it about your organization, your company, your leadership, the skills that you need that make you interested in going out to the veterans. This can seem contradictory, but a large company may be interested in veterans because they know how to survive and thrive in a bureaucratic organization like the military, where conversely, a small entrepreneurial startup would be interested in many veterans because they know how to exist and thrive in an entrepreneurial startup where there are no rules, where they have to make things up as they go along and get things done with no resources. So understand what you are so you can understand what you want out of your veteran employees. And then the second would be, and this taps into the D&I initiatives, is as you look at your job listings, why do you put down things in the listing? Are you looking for an MBA because of something specific about what that degree and what the time in the business school will provide your company? Or is it that you want to have someone who knows how to manage large budgets, knows how to lead an organization, knows how to motivate a group of people, and knows how to manage themselves well? Many veterans have those skills and practice them out in the field in abundance, but have never gone anywhere near a business school. So if you need to have those skills, break your jobs down into the competencies, into the knowledge, skills, abilities, the KSAs, and really list them. And don't list degrees or years of experience just because that's what you've done in the past. Because being in the field as a military member is like dog years. 1 or 2 months spent there could be equivalent to 6 to 10 months of civilian experiences. So really think about and describe your jobs in these kinds of details, and veterans will be able to connect with them better when they lack the formal training that many civilians may have attained. And this becomes a diversity and inclusion initiative because there are many people besides veterans who may not have gone through business school, who may not have put all those years into it, but through other mechanisms like volunteer work or military families have achieved a lot of these same accomplishments and developed these KSAs, and then will be a good fit and will be able to connect to the job listings that they see. And then this will apply also for promotion decisions. Really look at what you're looking for to promote somebody, and even if they don't have the degree or the certificate, if they've done the skills and done achieve what you want them to achieve, reward on that.
Absolutely. Well, I think that those are all great suggestions from the two of you. As we close, and I certainly want to make sure we post this, but where can listeners turn for additional information or support?
Our publisher would be remiss if we didn't mention our book. We believe it would have a lot of good information that companies from small to large to startups to established ones will be able to extract good information from. Beyond that, there's a number of reputable nonprofits out there. The government has led an initiative to bring together different agencies that can provide guidance and advice. The Small Business Administration particularly has local representatives who will work with startups. to help them with their veteran hiring. The Department of Labor has a national network of American Job Centers, and the website's careeronestop.org. And every community, every county has at least one of these. Usually it's to help people get jobs in companies. It's the new version of the employment office, but every office has at least one veteran specialist. So if you have a big national company, or if you're located in an area where you don't have a military base, you can reach out to these local organizations, and they'll know at least what's going on in your neighborhood, in your community, and they're also hooked together in a national network, so they can then advise you if you have locations other places. Many of them will also help you hire veterans directly. They have this national network, so many will also contact veterans in other locations who might have an interest in moving to your community. And it's a good place to start with one local person who can then connect you to the other resources that a place like the VA or the DoD have as well. There's the one organization called Hiring Our Heroes, which is run by the Chamber of Commerce, which brings together organizations and employers to look at best practices. And they release a number of reports and studies. And then you can also check out publications from Syracuse University has the Institute for Veterans and Military Families. IVMF, they have also research papers and publications on best practices as well, and those can provide guidance as well.
Thank you, Nathan. Kristen, is there anything that you might add to that list? It seems pretty comprehensive, but perhaps there's another source that you might want to mention?
Well, this is actually a tricky question because of the proliferation or sea of goodwill, as we call it, in terms of public and private partnerships and services that are out there. So there are a lot of reputable nonprofits. There are many government organizations, as Nate mentioned, between the VA, the Small Business Administration, Department of Labor, the office he works for in the DoD. And he mentioned, I think, some of the heavy hitters, if you will, in the nonprofit world and foundation world with the U.S. Chamber and University of Syracuse. There's some other great nonprofits, such as Psych Armor, Hire Heroes USA, amongst others. So, whether you're looking locally or nationwide, there are a lot of good resources out there. I think the important thing to note is how connected those organizations are and what their footprint looks like to ensure that they are reputable and have some longevity and sustainability to what they're providing.
Absolutely.
And then if I can just add on top of that, if you have any veterans who are current employees of your organization, by all means, start with them. You've got a local resource who knows your company, who knows your culture, and they certainly will make some of the best recommendations on what occupations, what services you'd be able to connect to. So don't overlook the local talent that you've got in your company. One thing we've seen about trying to reduce that military-civilian divide is it's okay for civilians to admit their lack of knowledge about the military. This is something that I learned, not having a prior military background, that they will respect your lack of understanding and your interest in building an understanding. So let any veteran employee know you'd like their help, you don't know the culture as well as you would like, and let them guide you to their recommendations and suggestions.
Well, thank you. That's really a great list of places to start, and maybe starting closest to home in a corporate setting is the place to start. I want to thank you both for the insights that you've shared, for the great book that you have shepherded through the process that I am sure will be of great benefit to many who are kind of sorting through how to approach this. I'm also very grateful to companies like Boeing and others who are known for their outreach to returning veterans and to families. And as I said at the beginning of the podcast, May is National Military Appreciation Month. It's also Military Spouse Appreciation Day, and it's also Memorial Day. And so thank you for sharing as you have. Kristen, thank you for your service. And I want to thank all of our listeners for tuning in. I hope you'll subscribe to the entire series, because today is just one more example of terrific people sharing their insights on important topics. So with that, I will just say thank you again to you, Nate, and to Kristen. And I wish you all the very best. I'm hopeful that this is a conversation and actions that we can continue to build on. So thank you for sharing with us as you have today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
This has been Off the Shelf, a podcast by The Conference Board.